I'm gonna. Which was my good side? I think it's this one.
And we are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, at CRE Collaborative, or at Andreas Senni.
Welcome back, everyone. And Darren Hayes is joining us as well for another round of the Roundtable. Technology, marketing, capital construction, and cybersecurity. Everything you need to know or should know to get through this month. And learn a little bit about last month. Truly a comprehensive view from some of the smartest people I know in their respective sectors, some of whom are pre-retirement with a car wash that does very well. So with that, as always, in our format, 3 parts. Part 1, we're going to go around. We're going to talk about who we are, tell a short story on who we are and how we got there. Part 2, focus in on what's happened this month, how it's affecting your business. And part 3, the secret sauce of it all, what to do this coming month to do better, to be better, to improve based on everyone in the room. I love these. Thank you, everyone, for joining and being a part of this. It is my favorite part of the month, sitting here doing this with you guys. So with that, Saul, I'll kick it to you to start, because I now know that the Zoom photos are not in the same order for each of us. So
something new. Well, it's great to be back. Great to see everybody. You know, time flies, and I've been doing this for 50 years, just about, I think. So I'll tell you that my background is I bought a car wash in 1979, and it's been a great business. We've applied our real estate investment philosophy to that, which is buy and hold. And I can tell you from 1979 till today in San Diego, we've seen a lot of price appreciation. And more exciting for me at this point in time, when I first bought the property, we got involved in what was referred to as revitalization, where there was federal block grant funding that came into the neighborhood and allowed us to revitalize the area. A lot to that, business improvement districts, street fairs. And now the area has come back. It's taken 40 years. But as I look back over my career, it's one of the best moves that I made, and I made it real early.
Cyclical real estate is what you're pointing to, coming in at the right time and then either waiting it out or making the right moves.
And it doesn't even matter if it's the right time if you can hold.
If you can hold long enough, real estate's always a solid investment. I hesitated to invest in stocks for a very, very long time for that exact reason. Chris, to you, sir.
Yes, so it's nice to see everybody again. I'm Chris Abel, Membership Director of the Connecticut chapter of Associated Builders and Contractors, better known as ABC. ABC is a volunteer membership association, 69 chapters throughout the country, around 21,000 member companies. So I handle all the membership in Connecticut, and I came through kind of different. I came through post-secondary education. So for about 10 years, my job was trying to get students and younger folks thinking about careers in construction, the trades, not being afraid to get their hands dirty. And for some reason, I feel like everything's kind of coming full circle where I'm going to see myself. I work with the big boy companies now, but I think I'm going to be trying to push more kids into the field, because all I keep hearing from the contractors I work with is how much they need the younger generation to grasp onto this stuff. So everything happens for a reason. And so that's pretty much my story.
Chris, welcome as always. Becca Carlson, off to you.
Well, it is always wonderful to see everybody. And I love how Chris just mentioned how it all does come full circle. My background, I started as a 3-day temp at a commercial real estate investment company and stayed for 14 years. And I have found in the past 4 years of having my own marketing business, how much that experience during those 14 years at a wonderful firm who I still get to work with and absolutely adore everybody there, that those experiences though have really lent themselves into my marketing business. I work with a lot of investors, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about what investors are doing right now, because I think that's going to be a neat piece to touch upon during our conversation today.
Love it. And Professor Darren Hayes, where did you get your beginnings, sir?
Hey, great to see everybody. Thank you, Andreas, for setting this up again, and for Reagan for producing this. So I began actually a different path in my career. I began in financial services. My first job was actually on the 105th floor of the World Trade Center. A number of years ago, I was in financial services for about a decade and a half and was quite miserable. Money didn't motivate me. And then I began teaching part-time and loved it, and got quickly got into digital forensics and computer security, given the proximity of my employer, Pace University, and to law enforcement agencies and intelligence, and began to see the power of technology because these people were investigating crimes against children, human trafficking, these types of crimes, which I didn't normally associate with digital forensics. So I thought this is pretty powerful for students to get involved with. And more recently, I've been consulting over the past number of years through my company, consulting with law firms and giving them advice on both criminal and private sector investigations. So great to be here. Thank you.
And Reagan, I know we have the future little Miss Reagan in there if you turn your camera on, but you won't. Our producer, audio mixer, the guy who makes it all possible behind the scenes. With that, here it comes. Is she there?
Hey, she's not. No, she's wait, we might. No, sorry.
Okay. Hard to keep track when they're.
It's hard to keep track. There's a lot going on. That's why I keep the camera off.
Love it, love it. And then myself, I mean, early beginnings, third generation real estate developer. I was the guy with the original iPad growing out of my arm, taking business from my betters through technology, because for my career, there was enough technology available for you to go out and get as much business as you wanted. If you knew who to ask and where to go. And it didn't hurt that I knew some of the right people as a third generation developer, because commercial is, of course, still a network at its core. And I am blessed to again have this group here now, because from broker, developer to technologist, to fulfilling my mission of helping companies succeed through technology enablement, which is why I get so excited about this call, because that's what this is all about. Saul, you buried the lead there a little. The Real Estate Information Network was what to you? Just for those tuning in for the first time.
The Realtors Information Network was what the real story was. The $13 million funded startup by the National Association of Realtors in 1995. $13 million for a technology startup was really a lot of money in 1995. NAR, Billy Chi made the famous speech, lions coming over the hill and realtors are like a bunch of chihuahuas arguing over the bone. And we needed to do something. We needed to do it fast. The NAR board of directors funded the Realtors Information Network, and I was the first person that they hired who was a realtor who understood. So I was like the sixth hire, and created all the marketing pieces and all of they put technology on my plate, and they said, because I've been a successful real estate broker for years, they said, how would you use this technology in the real estate business? How would you convince realtors that they should use this technology in the real estate business? And again, this is 1995, 1996. We created in that period Realtor.com, which is 100% owned by RIN, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the National Association of Realtors. And for 11 years, Realtor.com was the #1 most visited real estate website on the internet. But NAR had to spin it off in 1996. And again, I was fortunate enough to be on that very first team, to be involved in that, and then to be able to take training, to go to the industry and teach realtors how to use the very difficult. See, nobody believed in those days that the internet really was going to be around. And so we had to convince them that it was. We had to teach them how to use things like email. We had to then show them what a web browser was and how you could use that, and created the first online websites. So training was a big part of it, education, being in front of people. But it all gets back to, it's all relationships. And so the ability for me to be able to call different associations and multiple listing services and get them to book me to come in and speak about something that not everybody really believed in, and everybody wanted to protect their listings. Back in those days, it was public access to MLS was a great fear. and no broker wanted to expose their listings to the world. And yet somebody had to go out there and convince them that it might be a good idea to do that, because if you showed it to a lot of people, you could get a lot of interest. And that's where that all grew up. That was an
Which
NAR
brings me,
project.
sorry to jump in, which brings me to a hot topic I'm sure has touched each of you in your own respective areas: privacy. Privacy today. So Saul, you talked about how you had to go out and educate in the internet, and what a big, powerful thing, and it is around clearly. And as everyone bought in, they kind of gave it all away. And
Well, let me
Darren,
go back real quick
Go
though,
ahead.
just to say that
Yeah.
the internet wasn't created for the things we're using it for today. The internet was created in 1968 by DARPANET, and the purpose really was to allow communication in the event of a nuclear holocaust. As a matter of fact, if you knew how to get onto the internet back in those days, most people, their first experience was America Online, where, like, you know, people call it like training wheels, to be able to, because if you went onto the real internet and you didn't know how to use it, and you couldn't sell things, it was educational institutions. If you even indicated to people that people were rude, that you didn't understand how it worked and you needed help, and people would flame you, and then some kind soul would send you an email and help tell you how to download some kind of viewer so you could. It was a very closed shop. And then as we were allowed to take credit cards, and in commerce, remember, it wasn't built for that, and so they started to add all these different layers, and it just more porous. And so today they're looking at other things where people are dealing with lots and lots of issues. And Darren, I'm sure you're well equipped in this area, but my major point is it wasn't built for the purpose for which we're using it today. And so we're dealing with it, and they're actually very smart people. And, you know, so, Internet 1 was the internet, Internet 2 was the World Wide Web, and Internet 3 might have something to do with blockchain technologies and trackable and making sure you know where everything goes. And it brings back this concept of, you know, three legs to the stool: privacy, identity, and security.
Well said, and thank you for that. I have to say hi to Darren at that point. Darren, what has touched you on the privacy side and the three legs: privacy, security, identity?
Yeah, just to kind of, you know, talk about what Saul led into there. It is really interesting. And then I guess the second part of the internet was about shared resources. Is that, you know, somebody on the West Coast, Stanford, could actually connect with a university on the East Coast and use some of their computing power when computers cost $1 million, more than $1 million each. And so it was critical to have this network. And, you know, then we had a lot cheaper processing and computing, but now we're running into problems again, especially because of cryptocurrency and using up so much electricity. And in certain parts of China now, we're hearing about people with blackouts and that kind of thing. You know, as we try to solve more and more complex problems with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, it's causing a much greater drain on our resources. But privacy, it's finally bringing some politicians together. You probably saw the hearing on Facebook and what's been happening there. And a lot of states, more states are coming on board with their own privacy legislation, because I think they feel that on Capitol Hill that some of these lobbyists representing Facebook, Google, and others, there's never going to be any federal legislation. So a lot of states are following along with California and introducing their own privacy legislation.
Absolutely. So this relationship machine, because that's what it is, right? It's all with a bunch of things connecting, i.e. having a relationship, growing, much like real estate. If you want to get into it, you start building. Much like construction, you start with one road to another road. And much like marketing, your brand, starting to build it. Becca, you mentioned some privacy policy as well as what's going on in your neck of the woods. Why don't you touch base on that a bit?
Well, privacy is always a big issue, especially, you know, we work with people's confidential information. We build websites, we do a fair amount of data transfer, and we found that there are things that small businesses do kind of intuitively that are better practices than some things that we otherwise do. We've had clients who've had all sorts of malware issues and things like that. We've had clients who've had their whole systems brought down by ransomware. There's a strong reality that we need to have really strong gates as organizations, as companies. There's a responsibility we have to our clients. There's a responsibility we have to every stakeholder, whether that's an employee, whether that's, in my case, like my family network, like all of those pieces all come together, and there is a growing awareness, which is really encouraging. I would say that even my kids in school are taught at least a little bit about the importance of cybersecurity, a little bit about the importance of privacy. And those pieces are starting to become more mainstream, which is, I'm sure, why you're seeing more political action on these topics, is because consumers and people are starting to recognize that there are really a lot of problems that can be solved by growing legislation, by growing awareness in those pieces, because it is a constant fight. And Darren, of course, is a bold soldier in this fight all the time to make sure that people are safe.
And Chris, just recently I was reading about the construction industry and the security side, even the privacy side within construction. I mean, what have you heard of your members this month?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's been prevalent over the past, I would say the past few months, I've spoken to a lot of the contractors and the members I deal with, and they're definitely opening their eyes and starting to really put some investment dollars into, keeping all their records safe. And it's interesting, the marketing side of things, a few years ago when I kind of started in this business, the marketing side was always about just the marketing, the brand. It's amazing how much of the privacy and the security side has kind of taken over, where I've sat in a few marketing meetings where they will sit there and they'll say, and Becky, you probably run into this all day long, where they might do a 3 or 4 hour session and to kind of rebuild the brand and kind of peel back the onion and kind of figure out where they're going to go in the future. And as soon as someone brings up the privacy or the security issue, the first hour and a half, 2 hours I've seen go right into that. And it's where a few years ago it'd be like, all right, let's talk about what our website's going to look like. Are we going to accept credit cards? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? So it's pretty interesting. I see a lot of the firms trying to protect themselves. I see a lot of the contractors trying to protect some of the safety issues and make sure, okay, the stuff that gets reported up to OSHA is one thing. There it is. It's out there. It needs to be reported. But some of the back end stuff, they want to make sure that those things are protected. And that's more on their reputation side. Are there people out there putting up reviews? Are there people up there bad mouthing them? So it's not necessarily the security. It's more that privacy side of like, all right, cool. I submit all my stuff to OSHA. I do everything I have to do. Yet I have these other bad eggs, just kind of trying to rip down my company. So and it's tough enough for people to get bid work to begin with, let alone that whole side of the fact that they want people to work for their company. So it may not be about getting the work. It might be about getting the people to do the work, which we've talked, at length about how difficult that is right now. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how everything's kind of been, intertwined. But I am seeing a lot more contractors either investing or talking about investing, major dollars into it, which is refreshing. So.
Oh, and investment dollars are moving. Certainly in my market here in the Northeast. I know, Becky, you mentioned some stuff going on in your markets. Saul, I know you'll buy a car wash anywhere. So
not anymore.
Not anymore. Wrong cycle. But
50 years.
Buy it and hold it.
Actually, it's kind of interesting. So I tell people, say, when's the best time to buy real estate? So the best time to buy real estate was a long time ago. Second best time to buy real estate's today. And
I like that.
Third time is tomorrow. So it's like, if you have a buy and hold philosophy, you understand what's going around in your local area, because real estate is local for most people, then you can buy real estate and you can make money with it. And with interest rates where they are today, still, it's amazing to me that, you know, not more people aren't taking advantage of it, but I think people are catching on, and we know that like buying a house is really the way to build wealth for people. And so there's great interest in real estate. And I think the federal government has a big interest now in affordable housing. So we're going to see lots of funding coming into areas to increase the developers' motivation to build high density. Lots of stuff's going on. Mixed use. Right.
The 27% jump in foreclosure filings, courtesy of Adam Data just last month. We've got an increase in the actual home price index, 1.4% again last month. So it's expensive. This is my point to get into it. But as you said, today is the time to buy. And my investors here in the Northeast, they're looking aggressively. Becca, go ahead.
I got this out today. I found this little book. You know what it is? It's from the Resolution Trust Corporation. Now, you might remember the Resolution Trust Corporation that took over all the assets and the savings and loans and and then a lot of people made a lot of money buying up those assets, right? After an economic downturn at one time. So, you know, with the technology today too, you know, you're right. A lot of people are priced out of the market, and a lot of people who we might want to get into the market don't know that they can get into the market, but they're also with newer technologies, more security, more privacy, more ability to identify who somebody is. You're seeing technologies that are really allowing for an easier time to break up ownership of real property into a number of segments and allow people to buy into smaller pieces of real estate. And before, I had a securities license for many years, so I would sell syndication. I would get groups of people together, investors. And there are all this criteria. Well, lots of those rules have changed in the way in which we did it then and the way in which you can do it today. And you can buy segments of interests in property. I know a company that offers, you can buy interests in cash flows. You can buy interest in mineral rights, oil rights, air rights that are accumulated, aggregated in a marketplace. So what Picasso, was it Spencer Raskoff from Zillow, his deal where you buy a half a house and they sell 6 pieces of the other house. It wasn't really hard to do that kind of thing before all the technologies allow you to piece these things together, you know, instantaneously, and they pull human beings out of the transaction. So that's an important thing, I think, for people. When you hear this phrase, removing the friction, taking the friction out of the transaction, you often hear that about technology. It's going to take the friction out of the transaction. What does that really mean? Well, the friction in a transaction is caused by the human beings that are in the transaction. That's where the friction is. And so if before a property sells to, you know, I say the life of a loan from application to payoff, how many people have to touch that thing? And if you could eliminate some of the hands, which the technology is beginning to do, you're going to eliminate the need for those people that touch it. And then the next question is, will prices come down? And that seems to be whatever the government wants, is to drive the cost down. That's going to drive commissions down in the real estate industry. Lots of things to look for. Lower commissions doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means you have to figure out other ways to make money.
Well, so you said, frictionless real estate transactions, historically, at least for technology and otherwise, the less friction involved as a person doing things, the more exposure involved with your personal data, your security, your privacy. So if you start taking the humans out of the equation, the people who can say, intuitively, maybe I shouldn't leave my wallet on the bar. Then what? So that's my biggest concern.
That's all part of the education process, right? Whenever you're looking at technology, it's all about acquisition, adoption, retention. If you're in a business, then it's referral, right? So acquisition, adoption, I left one out, reliance, right? You get people to rely on your product, right? So that still exists, right? And that's part of the training and education, because these things we talk about, it's going that way. It's not about will it go that way. It's going that way. I'll tell the story when I was in the Navy. I I went to the Naval Academy. I took a course my plebe year at the Naval Academy, a naval science course that talked to me about a brand new concept. It was called the DX concept. DX, that meant, X like experimental. And they hadn't figured out how they were going to power the next class of destroyers. And so I graduated and I went to serve on my first ship, and it was like all Navy ships. They were steamships. People can't believe this. So I'm commissioned in 1972. All those ships are steamships. Now it's amazing how these steam systems work to run our naval warfare, naval vessels, but they're steamships. So I served for 3 years on it was only commissioned a couple of years before it was a steamship. My next assignment was on a ship that was like completely different. It had gas turbine engines. The engines were the same engines on a DC-10 adapted for marine life. It had variable pitch props, so you didn't have to stop the propellers and go the other way when you wanted to. It just changed the pitch of the prop. It had amazing. And it was, in my mind, it's like, I just got off this ship that was new and it was a steamship, and now I'm on this thing. And the point is that all these technologies that people will adopt and use are already being invented. They're already being integrated into systems. They just might not have gotten to you yet, but it's going to get to you. And that's why it gets back that we have to educate people. We have to teach. That's always been the chore, though, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I hope you don't mind, Andreas, but I was going to ask a question about supply chain. Now that you're talking about ships, I was watching the news and they were talking about this backup of container ships out in, New York Harbor and trying to get into Elizabeth Seaport in New Jersey, and same problem on the West Coast. And it's not just, specific to the US. We have these backups of these container ships. Has this been impacting, the construction industry? Have we got this problem back in terms of lumber? And, one of the things that I'm going to have my students do some work on is actually there's some great open source tools out there, like Vessel Finder and Marine Tracker, where you can track every major vessel across the world and where they are and where they're sitting currently right now, very similar to FlightAware, and to see kind of what patterns there are in terms of this buildup. I was out at Jones Beach and I just could see container ships all along the coast like I've never seen before. I was just wondering, has that been impacting the construction industry?
Oh, definitely. It's not so much, we haven't really been hearing as much about the lumber shortage as we are, all different types of fixtures, all sorts of, stuff more on the HVAC side of things, and the electrical side of things. What's interesting is I spoke to a couple contractors earlier today, and they have these window fixtures backed up. They have a few different things backed up, but the thing is, one of their guys kind of pulled me aside and said the problem is they had the issue with the shortage prior to, and then they went out. We talked about this a couple months ago on here. They went out and they kind of hunted down some comparable items where they can hopefully fill in gaps, and now that's the stuff that they are actually waiting on. So one of the guys in kind of full transparency said, we don't know when this stuff's coming in. Quite frankly, we're just hoping that it's going to fit the mold and be able to be used the way we were planning on using them. So now they're kind of kicking back and they're trying to get the original stuff. It's odd. I mean, it's a really odd time to be in the business. Then you have the other part is we're in the Northeast, and Darren, you're in up this way too, right? You're up Pace.
Yes, yeah, I live in Long Island, so.
All right, so being in the Northeast, it's middle of October right now. So now we have people trying to think about when this stuff is going to come so they can secure buildings, because we have no idea what the winter is going to look like. It could be like last year where the winter kind of kicks up late and we didn't get much, and then all of a sudden we got hit with a bunch of snowstorms. Or it could be a scenario where, I think it was about 8 years ago, we had that real freak snowstorm in the middle of October. I remember I came home from Florida and everything was covered in ice. And some of the contractors I work with are just like, this, we don't know how long this stuff is going to be stuck. We don't know if we can even start to secure buildings. We have no idea where we are. So they're really hedging their bets on the fact that they're going to be able to work, hopefully, deep into December, and they're kind of just hoping that they're there's certain projects. There's a big project right now over by the train station in New Haven that they're trying to wrap that up with the idea that I forgot, there's like 140 units, I think, and the cost per month for those units are out of control for what the rest of that area around the train station usually gets. But because they're right on the train line, they figure, people are going to snatch these things up, but they're kind of stuck right now. I was talking to someone on the project now, and they're backed up because of materials. The labor stuff they're not overly concerned with because they have enough to keep other their electricians moving, but they're nervous about it. And there's not a whole lot that they could really do. And to your point, sitting there and you're looking at what could possibly be your stuff sitting there, just sitting there waiting to come in, and there's really not much you could do. And I mean, who do you call at that point? You call who? You call your
piece of that's labor too, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you can't get anybody to unload the ships. Then what are you going to do? And I remember pulling into ports where we called them stevedores, where you had to have the people that were the longshoremen, and these people were union people, and you couldn't touch the stuff on your deck that only the stevedores could. And if they went on strike, then you could be stuck just waiting for that. And I can imagine today there's probably big shortages of people to do what has to be done. The stuff might be there, but you just can't. It's a supply chain. You can't move it from one place to another because there's nobody to do the job.
And without the supplies, the buildings aren't being built. The double-digit growth in rents for what is there is certainly appealing to investors who got in 12 months ago, and I told them to. Some of us on the call told them to, I'm sure. At least on the investment side, from my standpoint in Connecticut, it's all about land right now and getting ready for next year. Back to Becca's statement of investors doing things in Chicago. What are your investors doing? Just given what Chris said, if they can't build anything, are they building? I want to buy secondary markets on the supply chain. So we'll take it over to that.
Secondary markets. Imagine all the people who invested, because you see this is technology, who invested money in limited partnerships, who have limited partnership interests that might have some value, but there's no market for them. And so like today, and we look at this blockchain kind of stuff, everything will be, people will be able to trade stuff back and forth. So someday there'll be markets for all kinds of things, right, that we just don't even think about today, and of value, right? Think about all these limited partnership interests when people own pieces of apartment buildings or shopping centers. They're not REITs, they're not big ones, they're smaller kind of deals, but there's equity and there's value there, and there's no marketplace, but that's
no exit. There's no exit for that investment.
Yeah, no equity event, right?
It's true. So where are your investors finding those equity events?
Well, I have multiple investors right now raising investment funds. So I have several clients that are raising funds from $20 to $50 million because they look at this as a wonderful time to acquire property, and primarily looking at stabilized and value add. I have one client that has coined the term and trademarked it, value keep, right? Identifying assets that keep their value over time.
Car washes.
Car washes, for instance. Yes, we know those are very, very good investments in California.
Yeah,
but they're raising money because they are. I would say that is one of the most interesting things I'm seeing is how many are kicking up acquisitions programs, kicking up these fundraisers in advance of 2022. I think that as far as if that's an indicator of what smart investors think next year is going to be like, and what the next 2 years are going to be like in particular, I think that really does point to a very, very significant real estate market in the next couple of years. And these are all product type, by the way: multifamily, retail, office, industrial, maybe even a little, some niche stuff too.
So you look at like appraisal 101, right? Appraisal 101. Look at value. What are the 4 elements of value? Demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Demand, utility, and look for utility is the use of the property. Increased usage of property typically means more money. If I have a single family zoned lot and I can put 2 units on it, then maybe there's more value in the land, right? In California, we got this thing just passed a law where now you can build, it's going to have local pushback, but basically you can build units on your residential property. People think that'll drive property values down. It might in some areas, also might drive values initially up because people can increase the utility of the property. So demand, utility, scarcity, they're not building, they got shortage, and the ability to transfer quickly. So demand, utility, scarcity, transferability always drive value. And then the 4 great forces that influence value, and you got to look at them, and you got to look at them hard: physical, social, economic, and political. And how will the physical, the social, the economic, and the political forces affect the demand, utility, and the scarcity and the transferability of property? And if you weigh all that up, in my mind, real estate's a good investment.
As real estate's always a good investment in my mind. Generations of Sennies agree with me, and I'm sure many people on this call. What about the data of it all? I mean, what are we doing? So there's a shortage, as Chris put it, labor and building, and an inability to move forward. Is there an inability to move forward on the tech side? I mean, are there shortages there outside of the A1 chip for the MacBook because of China and so forth, as an example? What's happening on the data side? I mean, I read just recently, and then, not to polarize the conversation, but there was a hospital where a newborn died because they were under a cyber attack, because people couldn't respond. People didn't know how to respond. So to Saul's point of scarcity and understanding and value, the value in your data was the only thing you didn't bring up. And technology, in that real estate, there's value and awareness. So that's where I jump in on that. Darren,
I think Andreas, we were working with somebody, the value of the data underlying the land as it's captured in different ways has value, and will have different value to different people. And it's the technology is there to be able to do this. There are a lot of other reasons this doesn't get accomplished, but you're right that the value of the data that gets collected, and then the value of the consumer data around it.
So not just the mineral, but location, date, stuff that happens.
Who's looking at it, and what point in their life are they looking at it? And there's all the data. Get back to privacy. There's all the databases tied together. It might be that at some point in time, Amazon does a deal with a real estate company, and all of a sudden they figure out that the 5th purchase of some product results in somebody buying a house in a certain neighborhood. Or the second time somebody buys Pampers, they move from a 2-unit building to a 3-unit building because they get all of this different data. And that gets into identity and profiles and privacy, and all that stuff's happening around us. And the technology is there, and the computing power is there, and the ability to write the algorithm, that's all there. And then people are, and you look in the real estate industry, you see the big companies, they're all accumulating. Why are they buying that company? Why are they buying that company? They're buying up all these, they're lining all this up because there's this value. I would say data begets data, right? So if you've got data that people want to see, then you're going to be able to start collecting their habits around that data. And because everybody just clicks through the privacy statement, right? Nobody reads it. Boom.
Frictionless. Let me just sign up. No friction. Back to the friction point. And spot on. The construction, cybersecurity, it's all a mindset, a shift of ease of use, I want to say. So it's easy to understand and buy real estate. That's why people buy it. It's an investment because they can understand it. Now it's easier to understand and buy fractional interest in ETFs, to buy an ETF, a fractional interest, to buy a property or part of a property, because they can read it, they can understand it, they can see it. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, anyone on the call, you can buy the data that tells you when I'm going to buy something or do something. Wall Street, the New York Times did a huge expose on this about how we're all being programmed and monitored and watched from day one on because of our habits. Darren, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to pause there and say, talk to me, Darren, or talk to the group about what's happening with us as people Are we just a data set that's mined and then resold and then sold on a secondary market that we can't buy into yet because it's on the dark web?
I
More
think
on that.
so. I think so, but I would add a bit of caution that there's a lot of companies who are kind of hoarding this data and they don't know the value yet. And it's kind of like, collecting all this toilet paper during COVID times. We're not sure when we're going to need it or why we need it, but everybody's getting greedy. And so it's the same with data. I mean, if you use a mobile app, we can see up to 100 different connections to servers across the world, all collecting very small pieces of data about your interaction with that mobile application. So ultimately, how much of that information is actually of value? And I think the more and more we do our research, we realize that companies are just hoarding all this data and they're not quite sure what they're going to do with it. The other piece of this is of course, the AI piece, because with the amount of data that we are collecting, the only way to sort through this data is going to be using artificial intelligence. Of course, this creates a big problem for the US government, and we haven't heard a lot about this, but there are real concerns out there that those who have access to the data and the artificial intelligence will always have a leg up on making decisions, whether it's a stock to purchase or something else.
Which market to invest in real estate?
Yeah, and it's in real estate too. Yeah, absolutely.
You remember not too long ago was the GameStop issue where the price of the stock was really driven up. And I never put the two pieces together. And I used to have a securities license. But so for years, I had a securities license. And I knew the process when you bought securities. I would call my client and say, you ought to buy IBM. Or my client would call me and say, I want to buy IBM. I would call the trading desk and I'd say, I want to buy 100 shares. And I do it on a pad. I want to buy 100 shares of IBM at this. And then I'd hang up. And then later the trader would call me. He'd say, we executed your trade. And then I would pick the phone up and I would call, right? It was all this friction in securities and the people's capability to buy securities. Well, if you remove that friction, things are more easily done today, and it changes the world, right? Just changes people's outlook. And again, a lot of this stuff's already going on. It's already happening, and it's just not visible to many of us at this point.
Yeah,
but it will
the vast majority of trades on any exchange today are automated, and even news releases are read by a computer and are ranked, and they determine what number of shares they're going to buy or sell based on some automated algorithm.
Well, I couldn't figure out, so I'm paying, and I signed up for one of a discount brokerage years ago. $10 a trade. I'm wondering, how do they do this for $10 a trade? I charge $100 for that trade. Or I charge $150 for that trade. I charge $10 for this trade. This is amazing. And I trade a lot of stocks because I was a stockbroker as well as a real estate broker. And then it went to free. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like TD Ameritrade's free. I can trade for free. I'm trading in my IRA, so there's no taxes, and I'm trading for free. This is the loophole. Boy, this is an amazing thing. And then I read the GameStop thing. And so the trading for free made sense to me, because the hedge fund companies, they would allow the trading to take place on their platform, and the trading to taking place there, they would know who was buying what and when, and only need to give them a little bit of an advantage. A little lift, they called it, so they would gladly conduct the trades for free. So why is the trade free? Because we're feeding. And I think the whole other thing is that there's this whole new way to earn wealth, and it's data. And each one of us is a data emitting machine. We just haven't figured it out yet. And if we could somehow wire everything in our body, there was people who would like to know what hill I walked up today and what I ate for breakfast and what my heart rate is and at a certain time. And they would take that with everybody else's data and they would create something of value. And so we're all, right? Someday, right, as we somehow will all be able to marshal these forces and this something we should own. See, that's another issue. Who owns the data? And right now we give it away for the use of a device, but the fact is there's value there, and people start to see this, and it's an evolution.
Well, and so they do that today. So, I don't see an Apple Watch on your wrist, but mine's on here. And every time it starts to ask me to connect something new, I've now decided, no, I don't want this to talk to that anymore. because I've started to really look at it going, I need some separation. But Darren and Becca, you guys talked about these trackers for ships logistically. I'm sure there are investors out there hedging right from that. If they know there's a supply shortage because the ship isn't moving or the ship got lost, and that's the simplest example I can give you. I didn't know that existed. I knew FlightAware existed because I used to get cheap flights that way. That made sense to me. But there's a great example. Commodities traders looking at the world, sitting there with an AI, monitoring every one of those apps, because AI is not that you teach AI and then it teaches itself, as I understand it. Darren, you can interrupt me there if I'm wrong. And then all of a sudden, you know what's happening. Now, if we could apply that same logic to lumber shortages, although that's not the case, Chris, right now, as I understand it. And then the investors, Becca's investors, my investors can come in and offer not pennies on the dollar, but maybe a quarter on the dollar for that project that won't get finished because it won't be closed in, because it won't be secure. There's a whole host of opportunities in front of us, all of us, for those of us who are looking. As we head into the third part of our show here, one thing I meant to ask you, Becca, early on was how these cookies are changing in permissions, but I don't think we're going to have enough time now with GDRP and Canada and everything else. But what is and so you're literally clockwise. Just so everyone knows, I go clockwise. My screen is just different than yours. What is the one thing you would tell people to do as we wind up the hour here, moving forward for the next 30 days?
Well, I think that people should, and it doesn't take money to do this, but you should look into doing this. You should look into a platform like Coinbase. And it is a platform for dealing in cryptocurrencies. And the nice thing about it, you don't have to buy anything, but they have courses and articles, and you can read all about it. And people need to learn about that because that technology is going to become integral to their life at some point, if it's not already. And you can learn about it on a number of different places. And Coinbase happens to be a company that's traded, it's been through the SEC and all of the regulatory hoops, and it's traded, and you can buy it and sell the company itself. So I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that that's a good place to go learn. Learn what you can about blockchain. Don't be afraid of the term blockchain. There's more to it than what we see and talk about, which is cryptocurrency, right? There are actually technological uses. People are using it. Different banking institutions are using it. So I would say that in the next 30 days, put that on your list. It doesn't take a lot of effort. Just begin to learn about that type of technology.
And for anyone on the call or listening in, if you go to Coinbase, they'll actually pay you in other coin, non-Bitcoin, these other smaller coins. I guess that's not the right term. Simpler coins that are worth less money today, but they do go up in value. I myself have Coinbase.
Altcoins.
Here's how I explain.
Yeah, altcoin. That was thank you.
I say, cryptocurrency is like these baseball cards. Now, I bought these baseball cards for a penny a piece. And I got some really great babies like this one. I didn't know, this Mickey Mantle baseball card, a penny, and Roberto Clemente and Kurt Flood and people whose names you know. And I bought these, Hank Aaron. And when I bought them for a penny a piece. And I've got hundreds of these baseball cards. And they're all worth different amounts. But when I bought them, they were a penny. I had no idea that the total collection would be worth any certain amount. So that's the way I look at cryptocurrency, right? It's like buying I'm interested in, what does that company do? What's the technology underlying? What is the token? What does it mean? And if I like it and I like the idea, I might invest $10 in it or 20. It's like buying a baseball card. Now, 50 years from now, who knows what it'll be worth, right? So I think people should really learn about the technology, and it's not complicated. Don't let people scare you away with the complications. Just learn about practical application.
Love it. Darren, given the Bitcoin blockchain statement Saul just made, what should people do in the next 30 days?
Don't jump to conclusions. So I think that we learned a valuable lesson about what happened with Facebook. We we try to put 2 and 2 together, and it did not equal 4 when we heard this whistleblower and the Facebook revelations. So everybody thought that Facebook was hit with a cyber attack, and it wasn't. And so, yeah, have all the facts in front of you and wait to hear from the company before you actually, know what's going on. So don't jump to conclusions in the world of cybersecurity. That's an important lesson.
I like that one. I always freak out when my computer doesn't start quick enough because of my own personal experience.
Sure.
It gets a little glitchy and I'm like, oh no, take a breath. Think of Darren. So I love that one. Rebecca on the marketing side and in real estate, Chicago-wide.
So I think that probably what you should be looking for over the next month or so are opportunities. And I think investment opportunities are really starting to surface. Things are very quiet here. It almost feels like the calm before the storm from a deal velocity standpoint. So I think that if you're in commercial real estate and active in that industry, it is the time to be prepared, to be ready, right? Get ready. We know there's been dry powder on the sidelines for years. It's time to start thinking about how you're going to deploy that powder.
Love that. So prepare, analyze, be aware, maybe buy Bitcoin, but not Bitcoin. Altcoin, what was, I am having a mental block. Other coin, altcoin.
Altcoin, yeah.
Altcoin. Hey, Ethereum was altcoin till it wasn't. Now it's pretty big, pretty expensive. Chris, on the construction side, architect side, engineering, what's going on for the 30 days for those of us paying attention? And by the way, I'm moving into a new house and I need a new kitchen. Am I dreaming? Is it not showing up? Now I'm really worried.
No, some of the residential stuff, as far as getting kitchens. I mean, you might have to shop it a little bit, and you might have to really vet out your contractor, and kind of make sure that they're on the level. But I think we actually a month or so ago, I think that was one of the things I mentioned for the 30 days was actually digging in to whatever contractors you're looking to work with, and really, get to know them and get to know their product and understand where they are, and that they're not just kind of blowing smoke. I've heard a lot of horror stories with some contractors right now on the residential side of just stuff just laying around, having trouble. The gutters are supposed to go in, the gutters aren't. Just I've heard some rough stuff on the residential side. I wouldn't necessarily say the real estate development side, but the personal, because the smaller contractors that, the handy type contractors, the GC that's doing a lot of the small residential stuff, if they can't get anything, they can't get anything. And they're having, some bigger issues, when the reality of it is, if they want it to dig in and really get the job done, they might have to pay a little more, but they can go to your typical Lowe's, your Home Depots, places like that to get the job done. So I think you'll be all right as long as you get yourself a solid contractor to put the kitchen in. You may have to make some changes on certain finishes and things like that, but you'll be all right.
It's the HVAC that I'm more worried about, but that's okay. Different question. What's your?
Well, I got somebody for you. We'll talk about that offline. We're in the same state. I got somebody for you. So just a little bit different as far as the next 30 days. I've noticed, and I'm taking this because I see some contractors doing it right now, and they're doing it really well, is that instead of completely freaking out and stressing out about the stuff that they necessarily can't control, they are going back to the idea of controlling what they can, and they are concentrating on networking, doing some really strong networking to kind of build themselves out, because this isn't going to last forever. There's going to be more issues that will come up, but other issues will subside. So they're doing some really strong networking right now. So I would say some of these contractors in networking, and I'm not saying to rework your whole team, but reanalyzing your team, how you can utilize certain people. So if they're not on a job because they don't, because maybe a product's not in there, or they're not doing something, find the people who are willing to actually stretch and do other parts of the work that has to get done in your company, and start harnessing some of that. When you're paying them, you're paying those employees. You can't stand to lose them, because if you lose good people in that field, especially if you lose a licensed trade, you're in trouble. You're not going to get that person back. So I see some people kind of reworking their team, giving some people some opportunities to do things that they may have interest in, but they may not necessarily be, trained to do. And then the other thing, I see some people doing some just really solid networking while they can, and really like with developers, with architects, with engineers. I see some of these contractors saying, you know what, I'm just going to start building relationships. If I can't build buildings, I'll just build some relationships for the time being, and it'll all pan out. So I guess the underlying of that is kind of stay calm and
Keep calm and carry on.
kind of. I mean, you can't. Being patient is a whole other. It's tough to be patient when you know this, you're being tied up and there's money involved. But staying calm and just kind of controlling what you can is probably the best piece of advice that I could throw out there. And I'm taking that advice because I'm seeing that advice. I'm seeing that coming from the people I'm working with. The ones that are doing that are doing well. The ones that aren't, those are the ones that are constantly rehashing the same gripes or same complaints, quite frankly.
Well, no, great advice. Always great advice. We are exactly where we are supposed to be, and the rest is forward, right? The thing I've noticed from all the orgs I've talked to, and it doesn't have to be specific to data, but if you have time and you're not too busy networking, because I'm a huge fan of networking, as Sal will tell you, as Rebecca will tell you, as Chris, as everybody on this call will tell you, because that's how we all met, networking, good old fashioned networking at one point or another. But upskilling, data science, taking a course in understanding data, just the general academic of today's data is the best thing I can tell to anyone. Because there's data for good, for nonprofits, there's data for evil. You can't get that in school, but it's out there on the web. And then there's just data for your business. So to a great point, Chris, on the earlier point of education and going back to it full circle, you never, if I find that I can't learn anything where I'm at, I'm going to change where I'm at. Because then it's time to move on. And Mr. Mendoza, are you still with us? Any advice for all those wannabe podcasters or studio execs?
Do it. Get off the sidelines. Get off the
Get on
sidelines.
the microphone.
Get off the sidelines. Get in the game. You can't make episode 100 if you don't make episode 1. Now that everyone is starting to kind of, get back to normal and things, I think that it's interesting because I think people are spending a lot less time at home watching, streaming shows and podcasts and things. But I think people are a lot more interested in being on them. I think people are. I just talked to one of my clients now who does an hour-long commute, and guess what he listens to on the way to work? In and out.
Roundtable.
Yeah, so there's a lot of advantage. Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of advantages and there's a lot of disadvantages, from what we do, producing podcasts. But ultimately, if it's something that you're interested in doing, do it. Start. Like I said, you can't get to episode 100 if you don't start in episode 1. Plus, what's going to be the next thing? 10 years ago, people weren't really talking about podcasts, but people were doing blogs, and then they were doing blog radio, and then they were doing internet radio. And then all of that eventually slowly turned into podcasts. Well, what's going to be the next thing? If you're not doing it, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to start on the next thing if you're not already doing what this thing is. So that's it. If you're interested, do it.
All right. With that, Saul, how do they reach you? The Data Advocate, is that front and center
Yeah,
these
it's up,
days?
it's up, it's running. We're working on it. It's the dataadvocate.com. And so we're following all the litigation that's taking place in the real estate industry. We're following the different types of technology. We're watching very carefully what's happening with the White House and where the funding is going. And just about anything you want to know about real estate, you can find it on the Data Advocate, because we know where to go if it's not there.
You've taught it before.
We've done it before. Boy, isn't it amazing? It just all comes full circle, right? It's easy. It's much easier this time.
Hey, well, the internet's much more robust, and you
Oh.
have Zoom. Becca, how do they find you and what for?
Yeah, so we're on carlsonintegrated.com, and we have a wonderful marketing company, and we work with clients all over the country and actually moving towards all over the world to help them define their strategy and amplify their brand. And if someone needs to call me, I am available. 224-338-9855 is my Google Voice number.
Learned that
I'm
in a prior
reachable there.
episode. Chris,
Yeah, so
how did it reach you, and what would you like? What could you do for the general public? And by general public, I mean our listeners.
absolutely. I would say best way is email, ABEL at ctabc.org. And I know I brought up networking before. I'm a huge proponent of networking, and I don't see anything bad happening when it involves good people. So feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to network and connect, and kind of see where conversations might lead to.
Fantastic. And everyone who doesn't know me, you can find me online on Twitter, Andreas W. Seni, CRECo, the company I founded that actually connects your technologies for you as a utility. And you can always call me on my Google Voice number, 203-584-7257. Love to talk tech with you. I'd love to talk business with you. Matter of fact, maybe I'll talk about it next month. I'd love to talk about nonprofits and how data for good and all that's happening on that side of the world, because nonprofits and charities actually make up 5% of the economy when you do the math. But that's next month. Thank you, everyone, again for joining. Saul, lead us out. Reagan, lead us out, please.